welcome to the MAM Journals. This is the third of a series of 6 that I've planned to do in lockdown Britain. And anybody who's been kind enough to watch previous ones will know that last week we did the bike on my right, the SP1. And now today we're going to do the Ducati 996R. I'll be sticking to a similar format. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the history of the bike. I'm also then going to add a section in about volumes and how many were produced, because that in itself has been quite interesting as I've done some research on that. Thirdly, I'll be talking about some of the technical developments on the bike from the predecessor. And finally, I'll be talking about what's it like to actually run and own in a modern world and for a non-competitive, non-track day rider like myself. Right, so let's start with the history of the bike. The 996R was launched in 2001 and it replaced the 996 SPS, which was Sports Production Special, and was the homologation bike, the bike on which they based their race bike for the World Superbike Series. It was coming with high expectations. Ducati had dominated the race series in the 90s, and there was only 2 years, 93 with Scott Russell on a Kawasaki and John Korczynski, I always say his name incorrectly, won in 97 on a Honda RC45. This bike was designed to challenge again the Honda bike, the Honda SP1 that had won with the Castrol Honda team the year previously. They had been a little bit unfortunate for Carl Fogarty, but fortunate for Honda. He had injured himself the previous year, so they'd had a sort of slightly disjointed race campaign to take them on. So they responded with this bike, and this was the bike on which they based their World Series campaign. How did it do? Well, I don't follow all forms of motorbike racing, but the ones that I tend to look at are World Superbike Series. Obviously, I follow MotoGP, which these bikes are not related to, but also AMA in America, and I also follow British Superbikes. And of course, the Isle of Man is a special event of its own. So, how did they get on in 2001 with this bike in those series? Well, the first one, the AMA, if I cover that first, actually that was being dominated by Suzuki with the GSX R1000 with a guy called Matt, I'm never sure how you say his name, Mladin. He won the championship 7 times in his career, so it's quite useful, so it's an embarrassment I can't actually pronounce his name. And there was no moving him from his roost. There was a Ducati entered in the series, but frankly it wasn't mentioned in dispatches. The Isle of Man, and for those of you with good memories, you'll recall that actually in 2001 we had a bad case of foot and mouth in the UK, so actually they didn't run the races in the island, so it didn't compete anything over there. So really those World Superbikes, and from my perspective British Superbikes, how did they get on at that? Well, the World Superbike records show that Troy Bayliss won the series by about 30 points, so pretty close, from Colin Edwards on the Honda. Now, that slightly flatters the Honda, although it is a tribute in fairness to Colin's ability. But when you actually look at the races, they had 13 rounds. Now, 13 venues and 2 rounds for each venue. So that should have been 26 races, but from memory, they didn't actually have a race in Australia. So that means they had 25 races, and if you look through the records, Ducati 996s, R's, ridden by various riders, actually won 15 of them. So I think that was a pretty clear, dominant performance by Ducati in 2001. And if you look in the British Superbikes, it was actually mirrored in that series as well. John Reynolds won on a 996R. Steve Hislop came second on a 996R. And Sean Emmett, I'll have to check that, but I think that's correct. He came third on a 996R. So was it a successful race bike? It absolutely was. I said at the beginning I'll talk about volumes of production, and I think that's probably one of the
more interesting facets about this video for those that follow Ducati 996Rs. The urban myth is that they've made 500 worldwide, and 350 of them are allegedly sold immediately on the internet, and the rest were scattered to dealers. Now, I've always joked with my friends that of the 500, I've got one of the 700 still left. And the reason why I've joked with that is the engine number on this is 500 and something. So, although you wouldn't know it to watch these videos, I do actually try and do a bit of research and try and get my facts as accurate as I can. So I thought I'd try and kill two birds with one stone. So I contacted Ducati, which is a Korea, and asked them if they could verify any details. And I have to say they were very helpful. Although it took quite a long time and numerous communications and verifications, who I was, what the bike was, pictures of this and pictures of that. But one of my questions was obviously, is this a 996R or is it a copy? Not that I would have been particularly worried, one way or the other. I still love it. I'm a motorcycle enthusiast, not a financial investor. And I wanted to know, is this a real one? Was it, as it left the factory, as a 996R? And why, if there were only 500 made worldwide, which is the urban myth, did mine have an engine that was 500 and something? And I had a fascinating response back. Let me just get the email and I'll read you some of the details. Right, as I mentioned, it is a Korea getting in contact with Ducati, and they are very helpful and quite rightly quite protective for making sure they don't give information out on bikes which is inappropriate, so I certainly don't mind, but I did amuse myself on occasions about the length and complexity of the process. But anyway, they came back and said, we're delighted to confirm your Ducati is a 996R Testa Stretta Rossa Gran Bretagna model year 2001. This bike was produced in July 2001, sold to our national sales company, Ducati UK, and finally registered to a final customer in June 2002. So that's great. The frame and engine numbers match. It means it's the same as the bike left the factory. And this particular model was made in 30 units, and it was preceded by 56 units, part of the lot of the first 996R sold on the internet. And now it's getting interesting. Regarding your question about the reason why the number of the engine is higher than that of the motorcycles produced, we inform you that the first series of the 996R, those sold on the internet, was of 375 motorcycles, followed by another 325 units sold through the official network and dealerships. In total, 700 units of the 996R Testa Stretta model year 2001 were produced worldwide. So my 700 was a lucky guess.
Looking at the technical specifications of the bike, and with the exception of the new Testa Stretta engine, which we'll talk about in a minute, the 996R was an evolution of the 996 SPS that preceded it. Launched at Valencia in April 2001, the 996R was considered at the time to be the closest thing to a world superbike specification that you could buy. With Öhlins front and rear, they continued with the 43mm upside down front forks fitted on the last of the SPSs, and which, understandably, give a pretty firm ride, better suited to smooth racetracks, which it is of course designed for, than potholed British roads. That said, if you are fortunate enough to find a pothole-free, long sweeping bend, you will soon realise you're riding a thoroughbred. On a track, for those capable of exploiting its potential, and I exclude myself from that talented group, they are, I'm reliably informed, amazing. The R has more carbon parts than the previous SPS. The SPS had a carbon front fender,
airbox, chain guard, V fairing by the air cooler, and carbon under tray under the tail. The R has all of these, plus the side fairing and belly pan are also in carbon as well. Both the SPS and the 996R have standard plastic nose and tail fairings and air intakes. The clutch cover and air intakes on this particular bike appear to be carbon as well, but I'm assuming that they were fitted by the first owner. My thanks to members of the SPS, R and RS owners Facebook page for their help in this information. The significant development was of course the 998cc Tester stretcher engine. This is an introductory level video, so I should perhaps explain that Tester translates as head and Stretter means close or narrow. The engine is therefore known as the narrow head. The narrowness that is referred to is actually the angle of the valves, which are much closer to vertical than previous models, allowing the engine to produce more power. There are plenty of excellent YouTube videos that explain this in more detail for those interested. Clearly the race bikes, and indeed modified track bikes, produce significantly more power than this, which is the base level homologation bike that they are all based on. In showroom trim, they produce 136 brake horsepower at 10,200 revs, weighing in at 190 kilograms and, according to the handbook, achieving speeds in excess of 270 kph. In the real world, the standard 996R has been tested at more than 170 miles an hour. Bikes in track trim can be significantly faster than this. Like its predecessors, the timing is belt driven. As the consensus of opinion, it is important to change these regularly and at least in line with Ducati service schedules. The rockers are chrome plated, and according to some videos that I've watched, this plating can wear, appearing as chrome flecks in the oil. One to watch for if, like me, you prefer preventive maintenance rather than expensive rebuilds. With low mileage riders like me, you can end up with more miles vertically than horizontally, and while I jest, it does pay to look after these bikes. Overall, it is a beautifully engineered bike approaching the end of its development cycle, and an absolute credit to all those involved in both its design and its development.
Right, so what's it like to live with and own in the modern world? I'll be the first to say I'm not a track day rider, although I have done the occasional wobble around in the middle of a slow group just for the experience there. I've got no delusions in that regard. So how did I come to own a 996R? Well, I think I should sort of come clean at this stage and say I've had a number of Ducatis over the years. I had one of the first 748 SPs when they came out in the, I think it was the mid-90s when they came out, and in those days I used to ride a little more enthusiastically than I do today, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I moved on to other bikes and swapped it, and I didn't like the 999, so I apologise to anybody who is a fan of those particular types. It just aesthetically didn't work for me. But I did return to the brand with the 1098, the 1198, had quite a few S's and various other versions. And then I moved away from the brand and decided I was going to have more four cylinders in the garage again. And after a little while, I said to a friend of mine who's in the bike business and very knowledgeable, I said, I quite like to get something that's based on the 916 range, see if you can find me a nice one. And sure enough, 6 or so months later, he said, I found you a 998 FE final edition. I said, that's great, perfect, just what I want. So I took the bike, kept it for a couple of years, as is my way, and then foolishly I sold it. So after about 6 months, I realised I had made a mistake. So I said to him, I'm sorry, Rob, I've sold that bike, but it was a mistake. You couldn't find me another one. And he laughed, well, sort of,
and said, yeah, I can find you something, but I don't know if I can find you another FE. I'll just have to see what's out there. I said, fine, you carry on. Just let me know what you find. And he found this bike, 996R, and said, look, I found it. It's one owner, which I know you like, and it's low mileage, and I think it might suit you. So I took the bike, and I promised him I wasn't going to sell it and make the same mistake again. And 6 years on, I've stuck to my word, Rob. I've still got the bike. So really, I'm not the logical owner for the R version, because a lot of the Rs were bought by very good track day riders and for race purposes. So I'm slightly unusual. Some bought them as investments, and I don't buy bikes for investment. Sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes I'm not. But I just go, I'm a bike enthusiast. I buy the bikes that I love, and some of them make money and some of them lose money. And overall, if I end up about in the right place, then well, for me, that's perfectly fine. It's part of it. So what's it like to own? I have to say it's very reliable. I don't do many miles on it. They appreciate it enormously in value, which some people obviously think is a good thing. I'm less enthusiastic about that, because I think you can get to the stage where you don't actually want to ride them. And certainly I wouldn't be wobbling around in the middle of a slow group on this bike. I think, one, it'd be a waste of a good bike, and secondly, the chances of dropping it on somebody else's oil, which has happened to me on one occasion. I managed to destroy a 748 on that basis. I wouldn't be keen to do it on this, so I sort of feel almost responsible for it and looking after it. It starts very well, it runs very well, it has the rattling clutch that all Ducatis of this type have, but I have to say it's a joy. And we have talked about in previous videos, I've talked about the SP1, and I think that's a handsome bike, a rugged bike, but I think this is a beautiful bike. And if I was the type of person, and I'm not, to put a bike on a wall, or God forbid, in a fireplace, an in-joke, you know who I'm talking about, if you're watching, then I think this has got to be a candidate. So I think that this range of bikes will go down in Ducati's history as some of the finest they've made. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you found it interesting. And my next video, I'm going to change decades, and I'm going to go actually uncover a Kawasaki Z1000 A1 1977.